Welcome to a channel that's half memory and half evidence, where truth shows up in worn boots and bad timing. These stories aren't instructions, they are reconstructions, and sometimes there are guests. Nothing here is advice, and none of it's fake, other than this voice. From El Castillo de Blanquet, this is Steve R. Patterson.
Welcome to the channel, everybody. I want to take a little time now to talk a little bit about what it was like growing up as a Gen X child in a broken home, going back and forth between homes on my road to eventually dropping out of high school in 1985, though I should have graduated in 84. So I was born in Carbondale, Illinois in 1966. My parents were living there because my father was a student at Southern Illinois University. They were from a small town in south central Illinois. By 1970, they were divorced. My mother, shortly thereafter, moved to Chicago while my dad lived in the same small town. I stayed with him. He remarried to a woman who had 2 boys. And it was me. So we were sort of like Brady Bunch-esque, but things were rocky. The relationship between myself and my stepmother, I guess, and my dad, I got to be careful how I say this because everybody's still alive, but or at least some of them are. I don't want to come across as judging anybody, but things were tumultuous. And eventually I wound up living with my mother in Chicago in 3rd grade. And by that time, I was on, I guess, my 3rd school, 3rd grade. What happened over the next several years was we moved from the inner city area of Chicago started out at Lincoln Park Elementary School. And then from there went to Hardy Preparatory School, which was a Catholic school, for 4th grade when we moved to Uptown. And then later we moved to the northwest side of the city to Norwood Park. And then I went to Immaculate Conception, where I was eventually kicked out in 7th grade because I developed some issues. We had a suicide in the immediate family at home, and that caused me to derail a little bit. Like I said, I just stopped doing homework and everything. I got kicked out of school a couple times. I got back in because we were paying. Then I went to a Catholic high school, Gordon Tech High School, which no longer exists. And then from there, I transferred into Taft High School on the northwest side, where Grease was the guy that wrote Grease, wrote it about that high school back in the 60s. And so from there, though, things really got chaotic. Then I got in more into the not drugs and alcohol world, but the rebel beyond belief. I'd been playing heavy metal guitar. It started at about 81, 82. And by this point, that's all I wanted to do was play. And I ended up just stopped going to school. And that led to me going to several different high schools. And then also having to leave Chicago. My father had moved from Southern Illinois to Arizona with my brother Troy, who he's in some of the other videos with me here on the channel. And so when I got to Arizona, Troy and I formed a band. That was our first heavy metal band, Enemy, back in, I think that's 83. And I went to high school there, and then a couple of high schools in Phoenix, and then went back to Chicago, and then back out west. I was all over the place. And so by the time it was done, at one point I had the band Enemy in Arizona, and then a band in Chicago, Blitzkrieg, with my friend Danny Schaefer. I can say his name because he's still very successfully still out there in the world. In fact, a lot of the people that are in these various bands, I can think of 3 or 4 off the top of my head that are still out there in the world that are doing very well in the music space. But at any rate, things back in Chicago for me just got really ugly. And by the spring of 85, I had dropped out of high school, been kicked out of high school, and it went back and forth. One day I got reinstated, and by the time my parents left the building, I had walked out and effectively dropped out again. I mean, it was just, I was a lost person at the time. And the home life there was no anchor anywhere in Arizona or in Chicago for me, or at least so I felt. I'm sure the people around me would feel otherwise, but that's how it was for me. And so what ended up happening was, at the same time, I fell in love with the movie Rambo. And so as I was finishing up my heavy metal career, you could say, playing out and playing shows and all this, concerts, I guess they're called, for metal, I started going around the city of Chicago to all the Army Navy stores and building what I didn't know at the time was later called TA-50, the basic gear that a person would have. And so I bought all of this stuff with one thing in mind. I was going to save up all of my money and buy it. I was going to get a ticket and go out west. And that's exactly what I did. And it was the spring of 85 late spring of 85. I went down to Union Station in Chicago. I bought a train ticket. I remember it was like $212, I think. And it was one way. And I had this backpack full of stuff. I was wearing like Army fatigues, and I had sea rations or whatever they were in that time, all in there. I even had a little thing to open up the cans, and so I was ready to rock and roll or to whatever I was going to do. I was just going to Sandpoint, Idaho. That's all I knew. And I had a one-way ticket on the Amtrak, and my mother dropped me off, and that was it. That was the last time I lived in Illinois. And when I got to Sandpoint, I started hiking up to the mountains or up to the Bitterroots. I was going to Canada. That's all I knew. I didn't have any idea about a passport or anything like that. And I'll tell the rest of this story when it comes to how I joined the Army, because this is where that picks up. But basically, at the end of the day, I went to 12 schools, 12 grades, moved all around, never felt at home anywhere. The end result of having parents split up so early and then having families that had other kids, because it's not like you're abandoned because you never really belong anywhere to begin with. And, or at least that's the way that I felt. And so that's, I think, part of the reason why still to this day the reason that I've traveled so much, the reason I've been remote working for almost 30 years. And, effectively after I got out of the service, I followed the Grateful Dead for a few years, and I went through .com world. So I've never really went into regular society to begin with. So, and I think that that's somehow connected. Who knows? Some people would say, have you healed from that, Steve? Have you healed? Well, man, I'm almost 60 years old. By the time I get healed from that one, maybe I'll be too late, I'll already be gone. And everything seems to be going great today. In fact, life is wonderful. And so I guess that's the closing message of all that. Of anybody that listened to this that drop out, maybe if you are thinking that, I don't know how you would have wound up here, but it's just get that thing out of the way. I mean, having to go back and get the college thing later after having that tacked on, it was a bigger deal in the 80s. You had to have that high school degree. There was no such thing as gig work like today. I mean, gig work then was you're going to be cutting grass. You're going to maybe make your way up in the landscaping thing or something like that, or maybe you were going to do something else. But even then, if you're going to do something significant, it was going to require some kind of trade school, like if you're going to go become a welder or things like that. Because in those days, they had trade, shops like that in school, like wood shop and auto shop and all this other stuff. But, that stuff was gone. Well, it was there for me, but I mean, it's not there for you today. So you don't have that option. You have to get some of those check boxes out of the way. And really, that sucks. It's not as easy as it was in those days. And it wasn't easy for me to do it. And it took me a long time. You could say I still haven't dug myself out of that decision. But either way, I'm here today, and I hope you take something out of this. If you any Gen X people out there that this rings a bell with, feel free to comment below. Let me know how you feel about this. In fact, if you have a great story, or if you don't have a great story, I'd like to hear from you. Maybe one of these days we might get it so we can have callers, call in and stuff like that. I don't know if I mentioned this, but I had a radio show for a long time, so we could do all that kind of thing. Hey, caller, how you doing? Whatever. But that's all I got. Until next time, like, comment, subscribe. Remember, it's so important that you do those things. Otherwise, this is not going to be able to take off for me. I've been down this road before. I've had a 10-year gap. I'm coming back into it. And I'm not saying I want to have it easy, but I just want to make sure there's somebody actually out there, like Pink Floyd or anybody out there, right? Okay, with that out of the way, we have a moto driving by outside, motorcycle, and I'll catch up with you next time. So keep in touch, man.